Yes. So we are back here from ESOC in Munich, and now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Power from Beaumont Hospital in Dublin, Ireland. Sarah, the discussion is now more about standardization. I think you did a great work at your hospital and going into this subject. And for me personally, I'm very much in line with the idea of standardization. But in my experience, it's really hard to achieve for us as a discipline of neurointerventionists. Everybody is the biggest and knows best. And can you maybe do you have a wonderful team that just is inclined to this kind of stuff?
Yes, well, thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here. We do, of course, have a wonderful team, and everything is a team approach. But yes, in 2017, we decided to move to a standardized approach, first aspiration technique for thrombectomy. And that decision was made because we had seen the success of using aspiration on an ad hoc basis. Previously, we'd been mainly a stem retriever centre, but once we had some experience of using aspiration, we felt that this really seemed to be a beneficial technique, and so we moved to a standardized approach. So for our standardized approach, we have a standardized way of putting up a guide catheter, which is very, very fast. The whole procedure is very, very fast. We put it up in one maneuver, no exchange, over a diagnostic catheter. And then once we get access, we are simply snaking for the most of the time Sophia, our preferred aspiration catheter, up through the ICA and to the face of the thrombus with very successful results. And for those people who I guess haven't seen the snaking technique or the aspiration with aspiration, this is the Sophia being advanced through the blood vessels, and we either put it on a contrast flush or, like previously mentioned, sometimes we leave the 035 wire proximally in it because that's a device that we already have out and we've already used to place our guide catheter. And we have advantages with this technique. I suppose you get very familiar with it, you become very good at it, you can become faster, and all of our nursing staff know the collection of equipment that we want to have out, and it's very easy to anticipate our next steps.
Yeah. So the typical discussion is, you can't do that because each patient is different. You have sometimes a stenosis, sometimes a very tortuous anatomy. What's your experience about this? So it can be overcome?
Yes, it can be overcome. So an example would be tandem occlusions, for example, where you can argue, well, this can be very difficult, with tandem occlusions, but yet we do still use this technique with tandem occlusions. Of course, we first need to pass the occlusion, and we are, as in the main, we address like the distal occlusion first and then come back and address the stenosis. So once we have a guide catheter placed in the ICA beyond the stenosis, the technique is exactly the same. And actually we're using it now just not for distal M1, as you can see here in this case, or M1 at carotid terminus. We're going out more distally with even the 6 French Sophia out into the M2.
And as you mentioned guiding catheter, so how do you do it in a similar way like what Marcus just discussed? So guiding catheter a few centimeters back, this is the way you do it as well?
Oh, for the guide wire inside? Yes, yeah. We don't put it at the end of the Sophia, we keep it back, and even you can see probably where my typical placement of it would be in this video. So yes, we keep it back, but it's more just to have some proximal support. But often we don't even need that, and I would often just put a contrast flush on it and just put it up that way. Yeah.
And how frequently do you have to change the procedure? So let's say you mentioned tandem occlusions.
Yes,
how frequently is it you can't pass?
That we can't pass with a guide
Yes.
catheter.
Or with the Sophia. I mean.
Yeah, what I might do is I have so these were the results actually of our the study where we compared standardized aspiration first approach for thrombectomy versus a previous stent retriever group. And I might just briefly mention these, and then we also looked at another study at how easy we were able to pass anatomical hurdles with the Sophia. But for the results of our study, in contrast to the ASTRA and the COMPASS trials, we actually demonstrated significantly higher recanalization rates with aspiration first over stent retriever. and we were very fast. We were faster from growing to reperfusion time than both of those trials, and I think that was down to our standardized technique.
Yes.
And also we showed a significantly faster time from procedure length, first angio to first reperfusion, growing to reperfusion, and Astra didn't do that, Compass did. Now we also showed that we needed a fewer number of passes in order to achieve TK2B3 recanalization. We did require rescue therapy with stent retriever in some cases, 18%, but the reason 10%. For that 18%.
Okay.
And the reason for that was kind of twofold. About half of those were where we weren't able to get the clot out with aspiration, and the other half would be where we might have, like now, a distal M2 occlusion, and we would go and take that out. But to answer the question, we were always asked, how frequently are we able to get the Sophia to the thrombus? And particularly when we got the wedge microcatheter, we realised that actually we were able to get to the thrombus either alone with the Sophia or with the wedge microcatheter pretty much virtually all of the time. So Sophia alone, passing that to the thrombus, we can get that, we can reach the face of the thrombus in 75% of cases. 25% of cases, our go-to now is that we put in the wedge microcatheter. And when I put in the wedge microcatheter, there was only one case out, so 37 of 38 cases, we were able to reach the occlusion. There was just one case where we weren't able to reach the occlusion, and we had to use a stent retriever first. So the addition of the wedge to kind of our procedure has been a really major gain for us and has allowed us to get to the clot.
And you are using it, you have it in all the time?
Yes,
available you're still using it?
Exactly, yeah. So we wouldn't open it until we need it, but it's there, and they're sitting with the wire. The nurses know they have it ready to go. And if we can't pass the anatomical hurdle, most commonly it's the ophthalmic, sometimes it's proximal tortuosity. But if we can't pass that anatomical hurdle, then we just open the wedge.
Yeah, I think that's a very important fact. And you mentioned the studies, and Compass was intentionally very balanced between the aspiration users and the stent retriever users. And this was not the case in the Astra study. And if all the participants in the Astra study would have been like your center, it might have looked different. So this brings me to the point of training. So I think one of the beauties of standardization is training. Is it complicated to train?
To train.
Yes.
It's not complicated with this technique to train, because you can. It's actually quite an easy technique to do when it works, and then with the addition of the wedge microcatheter, also makes it easy. You know that if you can't get past the anatomical hurdle the first time, then you tell your fellow, that the next step is to use the wedge microcatheter. There's a little bit of instruction for them to how to use the wedge microcatheter, which uses ledge effect and exactly positioning of the two markers that show the dilated portion of the catheter, and to position those across the anatomical hurdle, like so for example across the origin of the ophthalmic. But overall, actually, I think an aspiration first technique is easier to teach than using stent retriever. Now, of course, you need to be able to do both to be a neurointerventionist who works in stroke, but it is a relatively easy technique to teach.
What's your aspiration technique? Do you use a syringe or a pump?
Yeah, so we use a syringe. Yeah, so we use a 50 ml Luer-Lock syringe, which we turn on. We wait for a short period of time, somewhere between 30 seconds to a minute, and then we start to withdraw the Sophia with fluoroscopy. Yeah. Okay.
Have you had any experiences with cyclical aspiration, some more fancy stuff?
Not personally, but I have seen it. I have seen it in demonstration. It looks very, very interesting, and I think I think it's really, really important that we modify our technique. What we're trying to do really, if something shows a benefit. So if cyclical aspiration was going to show a benefit is demonstrated, then it would be certainly something I'd consider, moving to.
Yeah, because it wouldn't change the mechanical approach and everything.
Exactly.
It's just maybe add-on benefit. Yeah. And obviously the complexity is reduced, and the cost. Yeah. Did you analyze the cost?
We did, absolutely, yeah. So it's a much more straightforward technique. and we realised that we looked like we were using less equipment. So we formally looked at this. So by doing so, we had 3 groups. So the first was a stent retriever first group, 127 consecutive cases. This was from the comparison study. We compared the first 127 cases after we introduced the new standardised aspiration technique. And then we also included a more recent group because we wanted to be sure that any gains that we had, they were maintained over time. And we record all of the equipment we use for every case, and then we calculated the cost for the equipment used based on the local price in our institution at the time. So we chose a time date of December 2019, and then we compared the equipment costs across the group. And we kind of excluded things that were definitely common to both procedures using stent retriever versus aspiration, like, for example, a sheath, a guide catheter, an 035 wire. But what we showed was that there was a significant cost reduction in using aspiration first technique, and it corresponds to, when we looked at it, between the groups, a 40% cost reduction overall with aspiration first compared to stent retriever. So that's really significant for a centre like ours. It works in the public system.
Yeah, because it takes into consideration all the bailout procedures as well.
Exactly, yes. Okay. So if a stent retriever was used in the case, it is included in that costing, and the figures you see there is the mean equipment cost per case, and
the wedge as well.
Yes, no, at the it includes the wedge as well. Yeah.
Okay, so one of the rare observations when something became cheaper than before.
Yes, exactly.
That's good to know. And I need to go back to the beginning of our discussion with the team. Can you share some insights on how you got there to this standardization? Because this is, for me personally, we are really struggling to agree upon a standardized approach. How did you do that? Is it just luck, or are you smarter than we are?
Well, some of it was certainly a conversation. I think we'd all, so there were actually 4 of us, and you see in the paper, it was 3 of us in the end that switched to the standardised approach at that particular time. And so it was the work of 3 of us that you were looking at. And the 4th did continue for some time to do mainly stent retriever procedures, but is subsequently now kind of coming more towards the standardised approach. And really it was a conversation, and what we are constantly striving to do is to try to kind of make our procedures faster, to improve our recanalization rates. We have a constant quality improvement programme, and we felt that this could potentially, be a benefit to our patients, of course, initially.
Definitely.
And so that's why we decided that we would, as a group, move to that standardized approach.
Yeah, congratulations. And I think we need to find ways to communicate this more, because it helps everything, training, but also studies, if we have more standardized approaches. So congratulations to what you did, and thank you very much for coming.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.